Welcome, folks, to episode number 39 of our Table Talk. Absolutely. We are delighted to have you here. I look forward to these times because we just deal with practical stuff that works through, and I'm so glad that you're with us today. We're going to talk about an important subject I think that all of us can relate to, and I think one of the things that I like about Table Talks is we give the opportunity to talk about honest stuff that we work through. And throughout the time that we've been dealing with our Table Talks, we've been talking about a lot of things. And people can look at our YouTube channel if they're at all looking to see what we have available and what different programs we've been done. And so we just want to make sure that you are aware of that, because you just have to go to the Estevan Church of God on YouTube, and and you can look at the playlist, and everything is there available for you.
And you know what? Sometimes me and you have to go back and listen to what we said.
Yeah, we do, because
we're in real life.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we have to actually practice and take the tools that we actually give other people.
I think that's an important point that you made, that it's real life, because still I found myself dealing with situations and circumstances that they always want to talk about ideals, when ideals aren't the issue, because we live in a real world, and the real world has variables and situations that we have to work through. And that's one of the things why I'm so adamant that we need to talk about real life issues, is because all of us face difficulties and struggles. We come to places in our life where we just at our wits' end, and sometimes we have to work through that.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is sometimes the day we're doing our table talk, something just gets us right on our you-know-what.
Absolutely.
And we gotta we gotta talk about this.
Yep, absolutely.
Because it's real life.
It is.
It's real life.
It's meant to give people hope, and so that is the whole purpose of this.
Yes.
And, we've had a lot of emails, a lot of interaction with people that are dealing with certain struggles, and sometimes really difficult, momentous things in their lives. And so
it is good to have conversations. Sometimes it's
why is it that we're afraid? Why is it that sometimes we're afraid of conversation?
Yeah.
And my answer to this is this. I think sometimes we're afraid of conversation is because we feel like we are going to be embarrassed, or that we're going to be vulnerable, but we don't have an answer. And sometimes we're afraid to expose some of our own struggles and the things that we deal with.
And conversation does that. Conversation actually opens those doors up that sometimes we want to leave closed.
Even if sometimes we don't have the answer, but the conversation, I think, sometimes can really be helpful.
Yes.
Because it's always good to know that other people are walking through stuff as well. And if we don't understand how we navigate, and sometimes talking about it helps us get perspective.
It does.
To navigate.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
the conversation itself actually opens our thinking and gives us new perspectives through the conversation.
That's right.
So it's important to have conversation. It is.
It's something that I think that is lacking. Again, I think it's fear-based and exposure-based, because we've all had bad experiences of when we have been vulnerable with people, or we have shared weaknesses, and it's turned around to backfire. And so as a result of that, we close. Or this is another aspect. We want to live an ideal to make it look like we have it all together. And so when we're out in public, when we're out around people we know, we have this idea that everything's together, all put together, but when we go back home, when we let down the mask, we're still lost, we're still disappointed, we know we need hope.
Yes. And I feel like too, sometimes even just in the conversation, it just feels like we feel shame when we actually converse, or we'd rather just hide it. Like, I just know for myself, it's really hard to get vulnerable.
Why is it that we feel shame? I think because one of the reasons why I think we feel shame, and maybe our listeners can attest to this as well, is because we want people to think better of us than we often think of ourselves.
I do better. I look better.
What is it about weakness?
Yes.
What is it about weakness that threatens us? What is it about not getting it all the time that threatens us? What is it about, when we struggle that we don't like that? What is it about that? Because as even we're talking about it, I can struggle with that stuff.
I feel it. Yes.
It's sometimes hard to walk through those moments because you're afraid what people are going to think about you. And we talked about that in some of our sessions about, the last time we talked about, what people think of you is none of your business.
Yes.
And the reality of that is, and I don't think we stop and really comprehend some of these things, because if we really would, there's a lot of validity to some of the things that we talk about and what we go through, and we want our listeners to know it's okay to struggle.
Yes.
It's okay to wrestle with truth. It's okay to not know how to always put the pieces together.
Absolutely.
I'm not a puzzle person by any stretch of the mean, and I would never.
Yeah.
But I know the feeling of being stuck. I know the feeling of trying to find something that's missing. You can't find it.
And you're trying to find that right piece to fit in that
spot. And you're looking, and you're looking, and you don't see it. And sometimes when you don't see it, it's discouraging. And sometimes we want an answer. And the hard thing to navigate through that is when we don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. When we don't have an answer, and we're going to have to learn sometimes.
Yeah.
This is hard to say, but we have to learn sometimes to be okay when there's not an answer. Sometimes we have to walk through feeling our way and not always having the right answer. And that's the thing that I love about faith, is sometimes we have this perception that God is going to give us every answer. And sometimes the answer is in navigating through.
Yes.
And not this quick fix miracle, bang, it's here.
Yes.
And sometimes we have to learn to put those pieces together.
Yes.
And that's part of life, and I think it's part of learning about God and understanding how He works is taking these pieces that we've been given.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's broken relationships. Sometimes it's a failed marriage. Sometimes it's a lost job. Sometimes it's an answer that we're looking for that we're not getting, and we find ourselves at this spot again and again and again.
Yeah.
And we can be discouraged at those moments, but what we're given sometimes are pieces, and part of navigating through life is learning where they join together. And I think we forget to appreciate the process. And again, it's not about a quick answer. I mean, that's great. I mean, great, one prayer changes it all.
Yeah.
But sometimes that prayer doesn't change it. No. Sometimes that prayer releases something that we aren't aware of yet, that when we start navigating and working through these messy pieces, because sometimes these pieces are messy, and they leave us empty, they leave us frustrated, they leave us disappointed, and almost sometimes at a point where we've had enough.
And you know what? Like walking through life, like everything you're saying, the things that feel like sometimes we don't have an answer, or we don't have control, or it's just a mess, those things can leave us wounded.
Yes.
And sometimes we don't even understand why we're reacting the way we are, and why we feel the emotions we feel, because we're walking around wounded.
Because all of us feel emotions, and sometimes we may not have answers of why we react the way we did. Sometimes we don't know why we feel inside a rage or frustration or a credible hurt, is because at some point in life we've been wounded. And we've been wounded by other people, or we've been wounded by expecting something, and that expectation hasn't fallen through what we thought. And a lot of times those leave scars. And so what we want to talk about these next 20 minutes or so is dealing with being wounded.
Yes.
And again, I think if we're honest, this is a subject that I think will really speak to a lot of people. Because it's where a lot of people are at. Wounds can be many different things. Wounds can be an ongoing expectation of something that I want to see from myself, and I don't. And someone picks up on that and reminds us of that, and then we feel threatened because we failed, we can't reach that point.
Yes.
I remember going to school with people that were really, really good with athletics.
Yeah.
They could run fast. They could, no matter what sport we did, they seemed to always excel.
Yeah.
And yet I would try my hardest.
Yes.
And I didn't seem to get it. It was almost like you're climbing something and you can only make it 3/4 of the way up and you've reached your limit. And when you compare yourself to other people in the walk of life and navigating through, because one thing I've learned is we all struggle. Mm-hmm. And because we all struggle, we all have the potential to be wounded.
Yes.
We all have the potential to be wounded. In fact, I would even go further and say we have all experienced wounds.
Yes, absolutely. I think
it's important to understand that we've all experienced wounds.
Because you know what? Even though sometimes when you're thinking of yourself personally, you're feeling the pain, and you're struggling, and you want to lash out.
Yes.
But we don't realize that person that maybe actually we want to lash out to, they are wounded too.
Sometimes our responses...
person is wounded.
Sometimes our responses are direct relation to the wounds that we have.
Yes.
We've used the word before in our table talks as triggered. Things trigger. Something happens and something's triggered because it reminds us of the past, or reminds us of a failure, it reminds us where we messed up, or reminds us of a decision we made.
Yes.
And it's a trigger. It gets us going down a road of defense and all that kind of stuff. Wounds do the same thing. Wounds do the same thing. Is they open ourselves up to areas that we're vulnerable, and when it's like being hurt doing a sport or at your job, and you twist your ankle, you twist your wrist. The first natural thing is to go and cover it up and to nurse it, right? And so when wounds aren't looked after, they really become
infected. They can become infected. Right?
And as a result, sometimes when we don't look after our wounds, and it's like we said before, there are many things that can wound us. Sometimes it's what people speak over us, or a mistake we've made, and someone maybe has criticized that mistake we've made. Or sometimes, like even today for me, you walk into a situation where no ill was intended, and all of a sudden, you've done something that has affected somebody, and then they've responded to that. And then you feel hurt because, but that was not my intent. But somewhere down the line, we feel like we've failed, or we've disappointed, or we haven't reached what we needed to reach, and so then inside we're hurt.
So that goes back to what we said last week or the week before about not taking things personally. Because when we do take things personal, it will leave a wound.
It will.
It will leave a sting, and it will leave a hurt.
And not acknowledge that is not being fair to yourself.
No, exactly.
Because a lot of people, that's just something I can just brush off.
BS.
But and I call BS on that because we see the fruit of it when someone is wounded. They're very edgy, and they're very protectant, and often sometimes I can speak for myself, we're harsh in those areas. We seem to be very stern. We have very little room for grace because it's a wounded area. And we want to protect that, and sometimes as a result we lash out at people. And I think one of the powerful truths is acknowledging the fact that we've been wounded. I think
acknowledge it.
I think we've talked about this before, just you and I. When something happens and a wound is exposed, or a hurt has been bandage has been lifted up, and all of a sudden it's exposed again, and how sometimes we react to that. And now we've been asking ourselves the question, why? Why do we feel it? Why did I react? Why did I react? Let's talk about it. Why did I react that way?
And not be afraid to go there.
No.
That is so
For so many years I was afraid to go there. Now I'm not afraid to go there anymore because I know that I can be healed and I can be liberated in that area. But as long as I don't admit it, as long as I don't go to it, as long as I don't deal with it. And that's sometimes we have people in our life that are like, there's just the roses and roses and roses. But we know deep down inside that's a cover-up because there's some wounds inside. And if we can acknowledge we've all been wounded. We've all lived with wounds. We've all tried to navigate through life while wounded. And wounds, if I can say this with all honesty, wounds skew our perception of what goes on around us. They do.
Yeah.
And I know, man, I know from experience that God wants to set us free from those wounds, because when we are healed in those areas where we're hurt and where we're wounded, our perspective changes.
Yes.
Because usually what happens when people talk about something where we're wounded in, we become defensive. Or we become very aggressive in those areas, right?
Yes, and that's interesting you said that, because I've had some conversations just with some friends.
Yes.
And we've recognized that we all have different places of wounds, because there's those places where we have not felt safe, or we have felt, and that leaves an imprint. And they were all different for all of us.
Yes, that's right.
But
I agree.
So our triggers are all in different areas, and sometimes we don't understand it. But when we're triggered, to acknowledge that place and be willing to go there is so huge.
One of the most not so wise things we can do when we're dealing with someone's wound in their life is push it off as nothing.
No big deal.
Oh no, that's no big deal.
Just let it go.
That's another one that drives me up the wall. I've had that happen.
Honey.
Oh, just let it go. It's okay. It's no big deal. You
just forgive them.
And it's like,
oh dear.
No, yes, in principle,
I know
that's true.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between the principle and the reality of working to that point.
Yes.
Now, I take my hat off and I will salute and clap for someone that can just automatically reach that level. But in my experience, that's not normal.
You gotta sit down. You gotta let that wound open. Got to get out the pus and the infection. You got to actually deal with it, and it takes some time.
Sometimes it takes a lot of time, and sometimes it doesn't, because we can learn to get over things.
Yeah.
But the first step in freedom, I think, in really coming to grips with our wounds is acknowledging the fact that we have them.
Yeah.
You know, I've been around people that have this really positive outlook on things, and believe me, I believe in that.
Yes.
But sometimes it's so much to the point they don't acknowledge when there's a wound or where there is a hurt.
Yeah, and that was me, actually, for a long time. And to be honest, I still struggle with it, because I am a very positive person.
Yeah.
I do want to choose to forgive, but sometimes to the fault that I refuse to actually open those places up and get healing.
And get healing in those areas.
Because healing is for us.
Our life.
Yeah.
Our life is too important for us
You're
to
too
stay
valuable.
living in that. Your life is too valuable to stay in that state.
Absolutely.
And again, step one is acknowledging that I'm wounded.
Yes.
There's nothing embarrassing. There's nothing crazy. There's nothing silly about being wounds. It's just acknowledging the reality that there's been some damage in my life. And part of me healing is recognizing the damage and recognizing the area that needs God's hand of healing in there.
Yes. And you know what? I think a huge thing for me to even recognize right now is, I know I'm wounded in places because you feel the triggers.
Yes.
But to understand that we're all wounded, because the person I pass by who might be being a big whatever and is irritating me, he's wounded. She's wounded. We're all wounded. To recognize the people around us, we all have them.
When people respond to us and sometimes abruptly or cold, a lot of it is because there's a wound.
Yes.
And if we understand that, then we can look at them differently. And I think that's where the power is in believing the best in people is when we're at our best, we will be our best.
Yes. And you know what? Even what you spoke on a few Sundays ago just about Paul, he had an area where he was really struggling, and it was a weak area of his, and it made him probably feel very vulnerable.
Yes, it
and
probably
then when
did,
God said, "My grace is sufficient," grace is so powerful.
Right.
It is so powerful. Even when you see somebody else struggling in that abruptness, grace is so powerful that it can dismantle that edge, that harshness, to understand they may be speaking and walking from that wounded place, as do I sometimes. I'm sometimes the abrupt one. I'm sometimes the reactionary one. Or you. And recognizing that grace is so powerful in beginning that healing. you know.
And that's the thing. The reason why we're talking about the subject of wounds is because a lot of times we haven't had the opportunity to control the circumstances. And the circumstances that we've walked through have left their imprints.
Yes.
And the hope that we want to give you today is life can imprint some pretty nasty things. It's not because you deserve it or that you failed or that you're mixed up and there's things you need to learn. Sometimes the circumstances of life have dished that. And where the hope is, where the reality is those things never have to break us. Rather, they can make us. We can learn from them. We can learn to make adjustments and navigate and get into those areas of our wounds and find healing. And I find when we find healing, we're less apt to judge other people about their wounds because we know the process that it is. And if we just ignore it and pretend it's not there, it never gets better. And so I want to encourage you, if you have wounds in your life that are coming out with your reactions or coming out because you feel triggered in certain areas or coming out because you're hiding in certain areas, I want to encourage you. Your life is far too valuable to hide. Your life is too important to simply just live in the background.
I'm just going to
reach out and understand that your wounds, that's the beautiful thing is wounds can always be healed. Or they can be made worse.
Absolutely. This thought came to my mind. If every one of us would think of people through history that you would label like that's a hero, like they made a difference. If we would look at every one of their lives, how they became a hero, how they've changed the world, and whatever influence they had, they were wounded.
Absolutely.
They were wounded. And there is a powerful story that when the wounds become a scar, that they can actually bring healing to others.
Absolutely.
And I thought that is so powerful when we can begin to flip our wounds actually break through for other people.
Absolutely.
And everyone in history.
Absolutely.
When we have
this is
seen
good stuff.
Our hero, and to know that they walk through and overcome their wounds. And I just saw a picture today, and it was from a wounded soldier, but when you allow other people to walk you through to the healing, when you've been through the battle, now you can be that healing. So to flip our woundedness to bring healing
I love
to those
that. I think
us.
that's so important because sometimes we allow our wounds and our scars to define us. Rather, what you're telling us, which is incredible, is you take those scars and flip it as an opportunity to bring healing to other people. Flip it. I love that because we're never victims. It bothers me when you hear in the church, like, we're the underdogs, we're the victims, the justice needs to come for us. I struggle with that thinking because that's not true. We're not the victims.
No.
We're not the ones climbing out of the hole trying to find this victory. We're not.
No.
Because the Bible tells us, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. We have to recognize what God's given us. That's why we're able to use the scars as an opportunity for healing other people. That's why we're able to use the experiences we went through, whether they've been hell or they've been upside down or plentiful. We have the opportunity to invest what we've learned. Not tell other people, but invest in what we've learned. And I think that's where sometimes the church gets it wrong as a whole. Is people should flock to us. No, we have a message of hope and restoration and of perspective and of gratitude and life. And we are living testimonies of that because of what Jesus Christ has done. Because it comes from the inside.
It does.
And so that's where that picture of that wounded soldier, I think, is very powerful because we often hold those people up that have done the greatest for us. But why they do it? because they wanted everyone else to experience the opportunity of freedom.
Yes.
And I just want to speak into your life, and I want to encourage you that you are important, and the wounds you have don't define you.
No.
But they're going to create a platform in which you can help bring liberty to other people.
Yes.
Because that's what stories do.
It is powerful.
That's what stories do.
Yes. And I love that sometimes our wounding has come from ourselves. Sometimes it's come from other people. Sometimes it's come from system. Sometimes it's come from, like, who knows what.
A lot of my wounds were a result of myself. Because I couldn't live up to the image of what people wanted me to. I couldn't live up to the system that was presented to me.
Yes.
And so instead of often attacking those systems and those things, I attack myself. Because and I see myself as a failure.
Yes.
I couldn't reach it, so then oftentimes I wouldn't even try because the system told me I couldn't.
Yes.
And what changed, and those wounds needed to be healed. And when that started changing, I realized, no, I can reach those things. I can experience those things.
And I don't actually have to be the end-all be-all, just like they say. You know, I'm actually okay with some of my weak areas. Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, that's a liberating experience when you're you're okay with your weaknesses. Because your weaknesses don't define who you are.
No.
Your weaknesses create a platform on which you can learn and grow as a result of them.
And so I like this saying here, honey. Nobody escapes being wounded. We're all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. So the main question is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed, but how can we put our woundedness into the service of others? When our wounds cease to be the source of shame and become a source of healing, we become wounded healers. That's what I want to be, because I know I still have wounds, because I know I still feel those triggers sometimes. So I know there's areas, but I want to be willing to go there and acknowledge those things and saying, okay, what's the root here that I need healing from? Yeah. And we want that for you as well.
Absolutely, we want that for you. So if you've enjoyed this discussion we've had and appreciate your comments, thank you for taking the time to send us a word, send us something, you know, and thanks for taking time to watch. And again, this is not necessarily end-all be-all, but it's an opportunity to have these discussions and allow you to take a look at us and how we've navigated and how we're still learning to navigate and stuff.
And hopefully it will create some conversations in your personal life.
Absolutely. We'd love to see you create conversations in your life, because we said it before, your life is too important to sit idle and to be affected by the events of life. But we want to see you overcome and rise above. So thank you for joining us again this Wednesday evening. And we just hope you have a rest of a good week. And we will see you next Wednesday. Have a great week.
Yes, we'll see you.
Talk to you there. Bye-bye.